been running this series for a few months now, and the name of the series is Indian Writing in English and in English Translation. And we have covered a few topics, general ones and one or two specific to poetry or prose. And today's author that we want to focus upon is the 19th century Indian English writer called Michael Madhusudan Dutt. And you can see from the name that it's a mixed kind of a background. There is a Christian, there is an Indian, and of course the preoccupation is to fight with or challenge or confront the 19th century cultural life. And Michael Madhusudan Dutt, as Professor Payal Nagpal, who teaches English in Janaki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University, will tell you, the background is that in the 19th century, people wrote for seriousness, for a serious purpose, with that kind of intent, that they had to communicate something good, something nice, something acceptable to the audience. And they were all, writers, poets in the making. They didn't have any kind of, people whom they would have inherited as a tradition. So they were pioneers in the best sense of the word. So I request now Professor Payal Nagpal to tell us about Michael Madhusudan Dutt, the main voice, one of the main voices of 19th century writing in English from India, and the kind of role he might have played directly, indirectly, consciously or unself-consciously. So over to you, Professor Payal Nagpal, please begin.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So as you rightly pointed out that writers like Michael Madhusudan Dutt are pioneers in the area, and we credit them with a lot of things, and same is the case here. So Michael Madhusudan Dutt is to be seen both as a playwright and poet. He wrote a lot of plays, and he also wrote poetry. And he's the interesting fact about Michael Madhusudan Dutt is that here we have a writer who comes to his mother tongue via English. So it's not as if, he writes in his mother tongue and then moves on to write in English, but quite the reverse. He writes in English, and from there he, begins to write in his mother tongue, that's Bangla. Though, of course, he's a polyglot, knew many languages. He was born in 1824, and he was just about 49 years old when he dies in 1873. Michael Madhusudan Dutt was born in Sagardari, that was part of the Jessore district in undivided Bengal and present-day Bangladesh. And the education that he received was Western education. So 19th century is the time when we have the colonial rule, British colonial rule in India, and Michael Madhusudan Dutt received education that taught him, the language, that taught him English, but along with English, he was trained in a lot of other languages as well, and he was trained at home. So he later joined Hindu College in Calcutta and wanted to become a barrister. He was very, very, attracted by the culture of Europe, and was hugely influenced by his teacher, David Lester Richardson. It's an interesting anecdote about him is that his father wanted him to get married and had looked for a match for him, and he was so disappointed that he was going to go in for an arranged match and not really be able to think about marriage the way he wanted to, that he converted to Christianity so that he didn't have to marry. And he converts in 1843, and he's baptized Michael. At that, he's Madhusudan Dutt, and that's when the Michael comes in. And of course, his this full name is something he uses much later. So, but because of this, he also had to leave Hindu College because it did not have any provision for Christians being a part of the college, and he had to join Bishop College. And of course, the family severed all ties with Dutt. So he wrote about 5 plays. So there's Sharmishta written in 1859, there's Padmavati and Krishna Kumari and so on. So and this was followed by narrative poems, and these are all that I'm mentioning. This is all in Bangla. So then followed the narrative poems such as Tilotma, Meghnad Bad Kavya, for which she's known. And there were also the Birangana poems. Then there were about 21 epistolary poems that he had written, and he also translated plays from Bangla to English, including Sharmishta. On the personal front, he married an English woman, and this was also quite scandalous back in the day. So he married Rebecca Thompson McTavish, who was of Scottish in parentage, and later, and he did have children. But after that, there is no mention of how a separation took place, but it seems that he just moved on, and he left his wife and children in Madras, and there isn't maybe if it is available now, I'm not aware, but hardly any record of his divorce. And he was later, he had a relationship with Emilia Henrietta Sophie White, and they had children as well. So during this time, he publishes 2 books of English poetry, since we are looking at Indian English writing and of course Indian English literatures and also literature and translation. But I'm primarily going to talk about his sonnets today. So there were these 2 books of poetry that he brings out. One is The Captive Lady, an Indian tale, and the other is Visions of the Past. So his principal works were written between this period 1858 to about 1862, and they include, of course, prose drama, long narrative poems, lyrics, and so on. But he starts with English, and then, as mentioned, he switches to Bangla, and his the plays, for instance, are also written during this period. So Sharmishta comes in at about 1859, Padmavati in 1859, and Krishna Kumari in 1860. So when we, like today, if we're going to talk about the sonnets, he uses both the Petrarchan and the Shakespearean sonnet form, with the octave and sestet in the case of the Petrarchan sonnet, and the 3 quatrains and a couplet in the case of the Shakespearean sonnet. So interestingly, in terms of writing in Bangla, he's known for the Meghnad Bad Kavya, which is a retelling of an episode from the Ramayana, and he also wrote the first Bengali play. Sharmishta is known for the fact that it follows the structure of the way in the Western concept of a play. So, following the proper acts and divisions and so on. So Sharmishta is actually known for this, and again, it is based on an excerpt from another, epic, which is the Mahabharata. And he Mahabharata, and he redirects. It's interesting here because he redirects the sympathy of the reader here in this case. So in the Meghnad Bad Kavya, so in a letter to his friend Rajnarayan Basu, Dutt writes, and I'm quoting the letter, people here grumble that the sympathy of the poet in Meghnad is with the Rakshasas, and so he says, and that is the real truth. And he says that the idea of Ravan, he says, elevates and kindles his imagination because he saw a kind of grandeur in him. Now, it's interesting because that was also hugely inspired by Milton, and I'm tempted to think about the connection between Milton's Paradise Lost and his depiction of the Rakshasas in Meghnad Bad Kavya. This is also the time when we have the Young Bengal movement and the mutinies around the corner. So it is a period of great social change, of great social reform, and somebody like Michael Madhusudan Dutt knew several European and Indian languages. So, for example, English, Greek, Latin, French, Italian, and a little bit of German. And of course, he also was familiar with Sanskrit, Tamil, Telugu, Hebrew, and also knew Persian. So it is with that we are also looking at a kind of renaissance in Bengali literature, and the way in which he introduces the sonnet form and free verse, which is there in Bengali writing. So here I'd request Professor Prakash to share his views on a writer with such a wide range, to write in English, to write in Bangla in the 19th century is very,
Yeah,
very
you
unique.
very excellently you have put up kind of background that talks about his variety of writing, and he has his fingers in many pies. He writes poetry, he writes plays, as you say, and draws inspiration from Milton, for instance. And the overall background of Michael Madhusudan Dutt is the Romantic movement,
Yes.
1857 or so. There is also, I don't know, maybe you can touch upon later, but in India, around the same time, 1857 onwards, there was a kind of temperature high. It was there all over society, and maybe Meghnad as a warrior, against Rama, of course, and who is Rama and who is Meghnad, that is not very clear, wouldn't be clear. But then it was a charged atmosphere in which he took to poetry and to drama. I draw this from your analysis that it's not an ordinary period or ordinary segment of time, that India is faced with so many choices, and refer to his poetry. India itself has a very rich tradition of poetic writing, plus plays. Ancient times, so many plays have been written, and those characters are visualized for being there on the stage. So all this is fascinating, and if somebody takes up cudgels against the social reality in this way through the medium of poetry or drama, then it's really appreciable highly.
Yes, that is absolutely true. And in fact, when I discussed the sonnets, so this idea about the influence of the Romantics, actually the influence of the English Romantics on that can be seen very, very vividly. In fact, I would even say that he, in that sense, I mean, considering that the Victorian period is, he's pretty much a part of the Victorian period, but he relates more, I think, to the Romantics than he does to to Shakespeare. Than he would to the other writers. So, this bit about his getting married, for instance, which compels him to convert to Christianity, was very interesting, where he wrote to his friend Gordas Bashak. He says that, I wish that somebody would hang me at the expiration of 3 months from hence. He says, I am to be married. Dreadful thoughts. It harrows up my blood and makes my hair stand like quills on the fretful porcupine. My betrothed, he says, is the daughter of a rich zamindar. Poor girl, what a deal of misery is in store for her in the ever inexplorable womb of futurity. So, he absolutely, this is from an article that was done by Aditi Shah, available online. So, it is, this is the time when, he would, to let's say, not get since he was not getting the chance to kind of get married the way he wanted to, he immediately converts. But it's not simply the marriage. It would be facile to say that it was just the marriage, because this is the time period when reform is something that is all around. And I think it is not just this, but the Young Bengal movement, the impact of people like Henry de Rosio, Krishna Mohan Banerjee. So, that kind of, in a sense, draws him more towards the ideas of social reform. And I think that kind of, in a sense, prepares the state, so to say, for his conversion to Christianity. So, if you look at the sonnet, here is one sonnet. He writes, I am not rich, nay, nor the future heir to sparkling gold or silver heaped on store. So, of course, it's straight away reminded me of Shakespeare's sonnet somehow. But please note that the sonnets and the poems are written earlier, and the use of the very, very typical English style with nay. So, I am not rich, nay, nor the future heir to sparkling gold or silver heaped on store. There is no marble blushing on my floor with thousand varied dyes, no gilded chair, no cushions, carpets that by riches are brought from the Persian land or Turkish store. There is no menial waiting at my door, attentive to the knell and all things rare, born in remotest regions that shine in and grace the rich man's hall are wanting here. These are not things that by blind fate have been allocated ever to the poor man's share. These are not things these eyes have ever seen, though their proud names have sounded in this ear. So, in this sonnet, Dutt is talking about the way in. He's first of all, I think, if we actually read the sonnet backwards, he's connecting with the poor man, and how all these riches have never, by blind fate. So he's also pointing towards the arbitrary nature of the way in which there are some who have a lot and there are the masses that do not have anything at all. So he says this was never allotted to the poor man's share, and he says he too has never seen these things, and of course these names have sounded in his ear. So what are these things? And he says he's not rich, and nor is he going to inherit anything. He's not going to inherit gold or silver, and there is no marble blushing on the floor, that he's not staying in a mansion, and no gilded chair. And somehow the word gilded was very telling and reminded, of course, straight away of the Shakespearean sonnet 55, though of course there is a lot of difference. So he says cushions, carpets, and again if we look at the use of the sonnet form, the use of a style that is very typical in a sense of the English writers, and how at the same time he's able to kind of bring in the Indian context, and connect it with countries and objects and items that were there in India. So no cushions or carpets that are brought from Persia or the Turkish store. And and no menial waiting at my door. So again he kind of his position connects more with the common man than with people who have riches at their disposal all the time. So he says there's no menial that he's going to kind of ring a bell and call, and all things rare, born in remotest region, he says, that shine in and grace the rich man's hall. So also there is, this is a sonnet that points out the way in which there is huge disparity between the way in which the rich man lives and and of course the context is feudal, because the concept of the menial, the concept of beautiful carpets and marble floors and so on. But he does not belong there. That belongs to the context of the poor man, and he says that this statement that these are not things that by blind fate have been allotted ever to the poor man's share. So there is no reason, and that makes one think. So indirectly the sonnet then makes one think about the reason for this kind of economic disparity, where some are endowed with a lot and there are others who have absolutely nothing at all. So this of course as mentioned reminded me immediately of sonnet 55. Not marble nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme, but you shall shine more bright in these contents than unswept stone besmeared with when wasteful war shall statues overturn. So the context is different, but the idea of the gilded monuments, not marble nor gilded monuments, somehow one could directly see the influence of the Shakespearean style here.
One would think, that this kind of poem would be written sometime in the 1930s, when India has the progressive writers movement, because he's talking about the poor people, he's talking about criticism of money, of a kind of capitalism, and he is taking sides. He is not just saying that this is true and that is true. No, he is taking a social position on these issues, and he's somehow very clearly talking of social justice. So all these things, I'm really surprised that this person could strike that kind of a critical note in the 19th century itself. And as we were discussing, the 19th century is partly to give credit for this kind of writing, because the person is disturbed, the person is angry, he is not satisfied at all with the way things are, and he is looking at India's poor people, as you rightly say.
Yes. So absolutely, I think you just put it so succinctly here that this is a protest poem. If I mean, one would, and to think of something like this being written in the 19th century is really praiseworthy, and I think one has probably not looked at that in this particular context. So where of course we also need to focus on the way in which language has been used. So the form of the sonnet, the use of the language, and so it's interesting that there is a book that had which had poems written in English by Bengali writers, so originally written in English. So these poems have been kind of put together in a particular book, and the sonnets kind of and the captive lady have been selected in that particular volume that comes out in the early 20th century, which also has a foreword, by the way, by Rabindranath Tagore. So here the total gulf between the way in which and there's no need for a description of the way in which the poor man lives. The poor man lives devoid of everything that is there in terms of the wherewithal about how to live. So and of course, as mentioned, that sonnet 55 is something that
Actually,
resonates with this.
That sonnet of Shakespeare talks about the individual voice in the Elizabethan times, and he is making that kind of choice, the character, the persona in Shakespeare's sonnet. But here, it's a stand of a different kind that is being taken. The similarities is remarkable, that the symbols, the metaphors also are more or less the same. But then, this is the 19th century. This is also a colony. And this is a place, which is being exploited regularly by the imperialists or would-be imperialist power at that time, and the writer is expanding his scope here into a different situation than the Elizabethan period. So that goes entirely to his credit.
That goes entirely to his credit. There's no doubt about it. And Renaissance in both cases, in the case of Shakespeare as well as in the case of Michael Madhusudan Dutt, the
Young
term,
Bengal, and
Young Bengal, and he's credited for bringing a kind of Renaissance in Bengali poetry. So it certainly kind of ties.
And he's anticipating Tagore also. Tagore is talking about the peasant in some of the Gitanjali songs, and this person is talking about the wretched person, the poor person. There is some kind of Christian humanism also here. That is given, a social dimension to it.
There is certainly, because the fact. I mean, 1843 is quite early when he converts to Christianity, and I'm guessing that a lot of his English writing takes place a little after that, and in fact, interestingly, before he actually goes abroad. So it's not as if he goes abroad and then starts writing. So he begins writing in English while he's here in India, and it's important to also place that, and here if we note, the use of English as a language is very important, because the whole idea of the empire writing back, so the how the person from the colony is writing back in the language of the colonizer. So English has a very important role to play, and to see the way in which then, I mean, Raja Rao comes in much later. So I think these connections are very important.
Even Tagore comes much later.
Much later, yes.
Tagore is born in 1861, and this person is writing before that.
Before that.
True. So that way, this emphasis on simplicity, on innocence, on concern for the poor, and a very simple kind of writing, that's what makes him Madhusudan Dutt, and nicely. So in fact, you already raised lots of questions, and I'm sure that these questions will be further developed in the second part of the discussion. So till then, you have to wait. Thank you.